On this episode of Civic Cocktail, former Interior Secretary Sally Jewell discusses climate change, conservation, and land use.
There is no such thing as clean coal. Under the banner of my favorite proverb, which is we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children.
Also, meet the region's top cops. King County Sheriff Mitzi Johanknecht.
It's been thrilling, it's been humbling to be elected.
And Interim Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best.
While it's a lot of hard work and long hours, it's labor of love.
The sheriff's office has a bit of a reputation as we are amazing.
It's all coming up on Civic Cocktail.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Civic Cocktail. I'm Joni Balter here this evening with former Interior Secretary Sally Jewell. Hi, Madam Secretary. Thank you for being with us. Journalists helping with the questioning this evening, Enrique Cerna of KCTS 9 and Steve Militich from the Seattle Times. Secretary, the Trump administration has promised to make America more energy independent, albeit, as many people in this room know, at some cost to public land and water. How would you describe those costs, sort of in a historical context as well?
Well, I would describe what President Trump is doing as the opposite of what he aspires to do. You know, in this day and age, energy is much broader than it was in a historical context. You know, under Ronald Reagan, one of my predecessors whose portrait I got to walk by every day was James Watt. He was actually a Secretary of the Interior whose name I remember because he was notorious for a number of things. It wasn't his attack on public lands that actually nailed him in the end. It was some comments he made about diversity, let's just say. But he basically opened up all public lands to oil and gas leasing and coal leasing and uranium mining and a variety of other things that it took 30 years to undo some of the most egregious examples, like, for example, the Badger II Medicine area in Montana in a sacred site right between Glacier National Park and the Blackfeet Nation Reservation. So what's happening right now is a replay of that, but to add to that, Joni, in terms of undermining his own words, he's made it harder to do renewables on public lands, which is something that we had initiated, standing up wind energy, for example, offshore Atlantic, standing up solar energy projects in the California and Nevada deserts, and facilitating through Congress the kinds of incentives, or at least what we were trying to do is undo the incentives for oil and gas so that renewables would be on a level playing field, and all that's being undone by this administration. So I will also say that whether you like fracking or not, the fracking boom has resulted in a boom in oil and gas production, particularly natural gas in the United States. And that, under President Obama, was growing our independence from foreign sources already, and that is a trend that's continuing. But under this administration, it's continuing in a way where we're not looking at a balanced energy future. We're not looking at weaning ourselves from fossil fuels. We are looking at increasing our dependence on them, which I think is a problem.
And it's sort of an exclamation point to that point. One of the more eye-popping things we've heard more recently talks about opening up oil drilling off the east and west coasts. I interviewed Oregon Governor Kate Brown last week, along with Governor Jay Inslee of Washington. And Kate Brown described a phone conversation she had with your successor, Ryan Zinke, 28-minute phone call, in which they talked about oil drilling off of Oregon, the public beaches, the 100-year legacy of public beaches. And she came away feeling very worried that this is really a possibility. What do you think about that?
Well, at first, I think it's outrageous what they're doing. The reality is there may be oil and gas and minerals in all kinds of places in the United States, but that does not mean that we should exploit them. Right? There are higher and better uses for a lot of public lands beyond their exploitation value. There's the obvious things like, you know, the pristine beaches that Oregon enjoys and Washington enjoys, but there are the intangible benefits like the ecosystem services we get from connected landscapes and ecosystems and forests for clean water and clean air and so on. That's all being ignored by this administration. So they have actually opened up all of the Outer Continental Shelf in their proposed 5-year plan. So what will happen is, it's a proposed plan. They will take input, including from Governor Brown and, of course, Governor Rick Scott, who they already said, oh, don't worry, we're not going to do Florida, even though they said they would. And it might have something to do with Mar-a-Lago. I don't know, but it's just a thought.
Well, Governor Inslee joked that he was going to offer Donald Trump a golf course off the Washington coast, so maybe we could get an exemption.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's an outrage because, first, oil companies aren't interested in all of the Outer Continental Shelf. There will be pushback. That pushback will be very expensive. It's a waste of resources for the company. And what Interior would be better off doing is saying, where do the companies want to go? What do the states want? What does the public want? And let's concentrate in those low conflict, high potential areas, which is exactly what we were doing. But it's a multi-year process, Joni. So
that's
they
kind
can't
of
just do it.
what I want to get into, because you actually wrote the plan for
That's
the current 5-year plan. So
That's right.
But I want to add that one of the things that Jay Inslee, he was more adamant than she that this would not happen. And I am wondering sort of how the timing does work. So you write 5-year plans. When do they become what we actually do?
Yeah, so I would say for us to do the plan from 2017 to 22, which is the 5-year that's covered, it took about 3 years to do that. You start broader, it's like a funnel. You start broad, and then with each successive input from the public and so on, you narrow that down, and then what you end up with is a 5-year plan, which is in place now. It says that nobody can go anywhere other than those places that were open. So it's a one-way funnel. So we had in the original plan the possibility of oil and gas in the Atlantic, but not Florida. Florida had been abundantly clear. Some of the other states said, we'd like not the whole East Coast, but just like the Mid-Atlantic. We took input. We held public meetings in coastal communities, and they said we don't want it. And the governors pretty much changed their minds, so we removed it. And it was not in either the second iteration or the final iteration. In the Arctic, we had some areas, we permanently pulled some areas off, and we closed the rest of the Arctic, even though they were in there at the beginning of the 5-year plan. So the funnel's a lot bigger when you've got everything, but it will get narrowed down. And governors weighing in, states weighing in, communities weighing in makes a difference. And it says to companies, if you even think about going there, we are going to fight you tooth and nail, including with environmental impact statements and so on, before they could actually do anything. So I think that the fear is, there's a lot of steps before there would actually be any activity.
Well, what recourse do the governors have? I mean, we heard from Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson earlier this week, so we know what one of the obvious ones, lawsuit. Are there other avenues of recourse?
Yes. In this whole process, each time it gets winnowed down, there's a public comment period, there's public comments that are sought. Those comments by law have to be addressed. So if you're talking about a governor, or you're talking about a vote of the Washington State Legislature that says, not in my backyard, not now, not ever, it's going to be very hard for the Trump administration to go forward with that in place. So. And they have to answer those concerns before they can go forward. But let's just say it did make it through that to the end of the funnel. There has to be an environmental impact statement done before even a lease is let offshore, and that's another opportunity to comment. So that's how our democracy works. It's not designed to be efficient. It's designed to make sure that there's designed to make sure that there is input from a variety of sources. So I am not panic-struck over this at all.
And it's not imminent. It sounds like it's at least 5 years away or something like that.
Correct. And I mean, the economics are changing for oil and gas. I mean, I just don't think outside of the Gulf of Mexico, there's a risk other than California, which already has oil production. They said, hell no, for years, for decades. And they will fight it tooth and nail. That's an area where there already is existing production. So I don't think we have to worry.
You were particularly upset with the shrinking of some of the monuments, particularly the Bears Ears National Monument in Utah. You wrote a compelling piece in The Guardian, and you have a lot of different targets of opportunity, should we say. Why was this one so important for you to critique publicly?
Bears Ears National Monument could not have been more tailor-made for the Antiquities Act of 1906, which Teddy Roosevelt shepherded through Congress, because there were sites, think like Navajo National Monument, Betatakin, Keat Seal, these incredible cliff dwellings, Mesa Verde, Hovenweep, these places in the desert Southwest that, are take your breath away, incredible. And they were being looted. There are carnival barkers that were, selling tickets to go in and see them. They were being desecrated. And so that's one of the reasons that there was inspiration to create the Antiquities Act of 1906. That exists in Bears Ears. And 5 tribes got together, and they are not always friendly with each other, notably the Navajo and the Hopi. Hopi are landlocked within the Navajo reservation, and they don't get along, but they got together on this alongside 3 other tribes and said, these sites are sacred, they're part of our stories, they're part of our migration and our history, and we want them protected, and we'd like to have a say in how they're managed. So they worked very hard, really for more than a decade, but particularly during my term with President Obama to protect these lands. On a parallel track, we worked with the Utah delegation to see if we could do it legislatively through something called the Public Lands Initiative. And when Congressman Bishop introduced the bill, he actually struck out and changed language that was carefully negotiated with tribes, nonprofit organizations, communities, county councils, and his own staff, really because I think he wanted to take on the Antiquities Act to prevent lands from being protected long term. So I think it was strategic on his part. So, that's one of the reasons it makes me very upset. But Grand Staircase Escalante, which was set aside by President Clinton, they also proposed to shrink. And that's an area that is driving tourism to that part of the country. It's an area where the paleontologist, Dr. Titus, has found 2 dinosaurs previously unknown to science. And they wouldn't have been able to do the work if it wasn't set aside as a national monument to begin with. So we will fight this, and we believe that it's already been sued, but we believe that there's that the Antiquities Act is designed as a one-way ratchet to protect the public lands. If Congress wants to unprotect them, they can do anything they want. Mm-hmm. They can also, by the way, take land or take waters off, like the 5-year plan, or they can put them in, regardless of what the Interior 5-year plan says. So Congress has ultimate authority. But we think in this case, the one-way ratchet will hold up in court, and they won't, what they have done will not stand.
Is there, in fact, a case to be made that the Obama administration overreached in creating national monuments? In other words, can you put too much land away in monuments?
You could, but I am confident the Obama administration did not. So I'll give you an example. The lion's share of the acreage set aside in national monuments is not actually on land, it's in the water. It's the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, which George Bush set aside because of threats to the fishery that were happening in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. So we know the main islands of Hawaii, but it continues to go all the way out to Midway Atoll. And all of that, he protected out to 50 miles. President Obama, after subsequent research from the marine biology community worldwide, said the stocks are still declining, we need a broader area. So we went out as far as US jurisdiction to the 200-mile limit. That's a boatload of acres and square miles. Did the same in the Pacific remote islands with some carve-outs because of economic activity that would be just really hard, for example, on American Samoa. But that's where a lot of the acreage is, and those actually, other than the commercial fishing industry, which would like it open, and they are actually the threat, which is why they're made monuments, there is no question that in interpretation of the Antiquities Act, it's appropriate to set them aside because of the critical biodiversity.
I want to bring in my good friends, the journalists.
I have a question. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard from some who say that President Trump is the most anti-immigrant president in the nation's history. I guess, could the same be said about his take and positions on climate change and the protection of natural resources?
Absolutely. Okay, so you can't really look at American history because we didn't know about climate change until relatively recent years, but what he has done in terms of making the U.S. government a hostile place to work for people who are climate scientists is really egregious behavior. In Interior, one of the climate scientists who was instrumental in working with the Alaska Native tribes in the Arctic that are struggling with climate change, you know, the communities like Shishmaref and Kivalina and Newtok that are being inundated with water, we were working alongside them on a solution, and the Trump administration took him, his name's Joel Clement, and reassigned him to basically oversee the accounting function for the Office of Natural Resources Revenue, which counts, you know, revenue from oil and gas companies. He's not an accountant, he's a scientist. So he said, you know, this is inappropriate, you're doing this because I'm a climate scientist. And they said they weren't, and he ended up doing a whistleblower lawsuit. But that's, I mean, that is a small example, and having continued to meet with a number of people within Interior and EPA and USDA and other agencies, I mean, to say it's a hostile climate for people who have been working very hard, the National Park Service and so on, to adapt to climate change would be an understatement.
So that's one quick follow-up too. Is that, have you ever figured out what clean coal is?
There is no such thing as clean coal. I think President Obama talked about clean coal, and I think he was persuaded in some ways by the Department of Energy that we could use carbon sequestration, you know, on site, you know, strip out the carbon and so on. And the answer is, because I've talked to Ernie Moniz, the Secretary of Energy under Obama, about this, and it is technically feasible but economically unrealistic. So there is no such thing as clean coal, and in spite of Trump's efforts to prop up the coal industry, it is not economic, and there's not anything he really can do to bring it back, and particularly the workers in Appalachia. I think it's just a false promise when the most economic coal is in the Powder River Basin, and it's pretty much all mechanized with 45 to 70 foot coal seams versus 6 inches in the east.
Audience, if you want to join us, come on over here where questions can be asked. And now, Steve Militich.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now?
Yeah, I am, well, first I took a nice break. My husband's in the back of the room, and he took, he took this sort of crazed woman from running through the tape at full speed at the end of the administration, and all of a sudden got in a, I don't know, what's a car, 30 square feet or something with me, and we spent 3 months enjoying public lands and decompressing and driving across the country. But I spent...
REI dehydrated food instead?
Yeah, some. Actually, we had the Taj Mahal, which was like the family camping tent, and then we had the little backpacking tent. And I had lots of hotel points.
Little tiny, that little tiny stove?
Yeah, we had that too. But the short answer is, I just finished a fellowship at Harvard in the Institute of Politics, and I had a syllabus, thank you. And basically, I'm bringing that to the University of Washington. So I will be starting, thank you.
In what form?
I will be a distinguished fellow.
Oh.
Maybe it's extinguished.
I did that once when I was in 6th grade. I introduced somebody as extinguished.
Oh, whoops.
I thought it was a big word. Come on.
Not as bad as a friend of mine who introduced the mayor and had a slip and called him Mayor Nipples instead. So you don't want to do that. Yeah, no, that was bad.
Do we know this mayor? Do we know the mayor? Mayor Nichols? No?
This was Mayor Nichols getting introduced at an event. Yeah, it was a faux pas. I did not make it, but I did find it amusing. Where were we going with this? Oh, yeah.
All right.
So Steve's question.
It's about you. It's about your career.
Yeah, so at Harvard, you know, I could pick whatever I wanted. So I picked a theme of basically under the banner of my favorite proverb, which is we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. Okay? Let it sink in. How do we create a future that's both economically successful, which is important for humans, but also environmentally sustainable, that we're proud to leave to the succeeding generations? And what are the various parts of democracy and civil society that are needed to do that? And so each week I dissected a piece of that. I talked about the business role in the future of the planet. I talked about nonprofit organizations and when getting sued can be good. You know, the role of nonprofit organizations in holding government accountable and pointing out unintended consequences of laws. I did one with tribal communities on food security. I did one with Dave Archambault from Standing Rock on citizen activism and the role of citizen activism in the Dakota Access Pipeline. So the reality is solving climate change and a lot of these other big challenges is horizontal. And universities and even nonprofits and so on operate very vertically, you know, with deep expertise, but without coordination. So when I talked to President Kause and about where I might slot in to the university, I said, you know, I'm more of a utility player than I am an expert. So is there a way to work across the university? And instead of affiliating, I mean, I will work for sure with the Kennedy School and the business, I mean, excuse me, the Evans School, our favorite politician. Certainly our favorite Republican politician probably ever. But instead of kind of parking there, I want to park myself in the College of the Environment. So that's where I will be. And I want to work with professors from across the organization because students really care about this and they want to be part of the solution, whether they're a business student or a communication student or they're in public health. I mean, public health and the environment are also tied together. So I don't know what this distinguished fellowship is going to look like, but I think I'm going to have a lot of fun based on the fun I had working with students at Harvard. So that's what's next.
I want to make sure I fit in the new national park entrance fees at 17 national parks. This represents a doubling. Places like we're talking about Mount Rainier National Park, Olympic National Park. You clearly at REI and Interior had a much different approach to this kind of thing. What do you think about higher costs like that? Is that going to help bring more people into the park?
No, it's going to reduce the number of people in the parks. And I think for the people that are underrepresented, it's basically going to say you're not welcome here. I mean, it's really, really stupid. And what it's trying to do is take multiple years of deferred maintenance, and we have this in basically all of our public institutions. We have it at every level of government. We certainly have it in our national parks. The deficit right now in deferred maintenance is about $12 billion, and half of that's roads. So, but you go and the facilities are crumbling, and a lot of times the toilets don't work, or they're like brand new and magnificent, right? So there's no in between, and we do brand new and magnificent and let it deteriorate, and we don't take care of the other things that we have. So Zinke's proposal to go, well, it's in 17 parks that are the most popular, and what they're trying to do is address the deferred maintenance on the back of the current visitors, and the deferred maintenance has taken decades to get to that point.
Well, where else are we going to get the money for deferred maintenance?
Well, you're going to get it from the highway fund, which is where the dollars come from to fix up a lot of roads, including national park roads. I mean, Memorial Bridge going into Washington, D.C. is $250 million alone, okay? And it won't hold any tanks. I'll just tell you that right now.
No tanks?
No tanks. No tanks. It won't even hold buses. It won't even hold buses right now. But you can't do it on entry fees. They're a small, very small portion of the Park Service budget. You really need to do it by prioritizing dealing with deferred maintenance. And if you're going to do infrastructure, let's do part of the infrastructure on in public lands. Let's address it that way, which is actually going to really get to the problem, as opposed to, jacking up the fees. And, when you look at visitation national parks and you talk to communities that are underrepresented now, they view it as expensive. They view it as sort of oriented toward white, affluent people that travel and so on. And that's not, these are everybody's public lands. These belong to all Americans. So we should be knocking down barriers to entry, not increasing fees.
And on that point, what should we do, or what did you do to bring some of the younger generation has really limited attachment to the outdoors.
Yeah.
So what can we do, what should we do to bring, everyone, people of all generations, but especially poor inner city children, into these wild lands?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot, and it was a particular focus of mine, both at REI and then here. I mean, you want to have future conservationists, people that care about public lands, people that appreciate what makes our region so special and so on. You got to get them young. And so we created a continuum of engagement, and it really starts with play. It starts with playing outside and feeling comfortable and confident climbing a tree, mucking around in the mud, you know, and that means you have to have a space to do that, and you have to feel safe in that space. So in that score, we worked with the YMCA because it's nationwide, largest daycare provider in the country, and cities, including Seattle. So we had 52 or 51 cities. Would have been 50, but Minneapolis and St. Paul are 2 cities. But we worked with the YMCA, the federal agencies, the mayors, the city parks, and said we have to get more kids playing. And I actually raised private money through American Express Foundation to pay for that, and matched it out of my own budget with AmeriCorps folks to drive that process forward. Then there's Learn, and the sort of center point of that, so play, learn. So if you get them playing, there's no better classroom than the one with no walls, with Mother Nature as the teacher. So every kid in a park, every 4th grader in the United States today can get a free pass, like the America the Beautiful pass, to take their entire family into a national park, even if they raise the fees, right? Then so it's play, learn, then it's serve, and so that's service on public lands, and we supported volunteer youth corps and so on, and then work, which is creating a pathway for kids to ultimately work, not only as park rangers, but also in nonprofit organizations and you know, trail crews and otherwise, that gives them a connection to place that will never leave them. So that was the continuum, and it was really an important priority for me.
So Enrique is going to ask you the last.
I was curious, how soon do you, are you planning to come to the Evans School or University of Washington and start what you were doing?
I'm kind of already started. Yeah, I don't have an office. I probably won't have an office. I'll probably hotel there, but I would say, you know, before the end of the month, I'll be spending several days there, and I'll be networking my way around. I'm working with Earth Lab right now, and did a half-day strategy session with them, and we'll be doing another one, chairing their advisory board. And I also said to President Kelsey that I'll work with her on the population health initiative. So it's already starting.
What is the population health initiative?
It is an effort on the part of the university to knit a lot of the different areas of expertise together to address some of the biggest challenges we have in population. And one of the things that I'll bring to that equation is one of the challenges to populations has to do with climate change. So think Zika coming north, right? Think refugees and that are climate refugees, of which there will be hundreds of millions in a relatively short period of time, just because of the, you know, the impact on places like, well, Jakarta, which is both subsiding because of water being taken out and sea level rise, and that's, you know, so this will be taking a look at all of those things, and on the population health side, bringing different parts of the university and outside community together, just as we will be doing on the environment, and there'll be an intersection between those two.
What are you most proud of from your time as Interior Secretary? Just 1 or 2 or 3 quick things, because we're running out of time here.
Yeah, I don't have the countdown clock like I'm used to.
I do.
You do. So one, and we haven't talked about this, but I would say rebuilding a trusting relationship between tribal communities, Alaska Natives, American Indians, and Native Hawaiians with their federal government. Settled over 100 lawsuits, billions of dollars, paid back for really egregious behavior on the part of the federal government over time. And while that does not appear to be, the momentum is not continuing right now, I will say this, that one of the things I'm most proud of within that subset is unlocking the pride of Native youth in their own heritage. And you see this. It was kids running from North Dakota to Washington, D.C., delivering a petition to the U.S. federal government that launched the protests around the Dakota Access Pipeline. So looks like we're out of time because you're getting shifty.
That's my face. Yes.
So all right, I'll give you this one.
That's what I do. So we have been talking with Interior Secretary Sally Jewell, former Interior Secretary, coming right back to chat with 2 top law enforcement officials in our fair city. Thank you so much. And welcome back to Civic Cocktail. Our guests include Carmen, Interim Seattle Police Chief, and Mitzi Johanknecht, the new Sheriff of King County. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Joni.
You are both brand new in your jobs. So what we want to know is, what's the hardest part of being the new boss, the new female boss in 2 of the largest law enforcement agencies in the state? We'll start with you, Sheriff Johanknecht.
Well, thank you, Joni, and thanks everyone for being here. I've been doing the job for 33 years and predominantly worked with men that whole time. So, it's been a pretty easy transition. It's been thrilling, it's been humbling to be elected, and just kind of starting to get caught up on all that the sheriff does every day.
How about you?
Geez, I love the job, so I can't think of anything I would say that's long hours, but it is a labor of love. I've been in the business not quite as long as Mitzi, but for 26 years, I can't think of an assignment or a place I've worked that I haven't really enjoyed and got something from. So while it's a lot of hard work and long hours, it's labor of love. So I enjoy every moment of it. Really, I do.
Sheriff Johanknecht, the sheriff's office has a bit of a reputation as a...
We are amazing.
I'm just getting warmed up here. As a toxic work environment. Is it toxic, and what are you doing to detoxify?
We really do have amazing people within the sheriff's office, and you don't come into law enforcement without having a heart of a servant. Mm-hmm. And so each and every day, our members, Seattle Police Department, every law enforcement member works really hard to provide good service to the people that we take care of. And so our outward expression can sometimes be really positive, and sometimes inwardly we can be hurting. And that's one of the reasons I ran for office. It's one of the things that is quickly healing within the organization. And so people tell me it's a breath of fresh air. They feel like they can go about doing police work again, about doing the business of public safety.
Chief Best, Seattle recently passed the first round of police reform. The court said Seattle was in full and effective compliance.
Yes, they did. I'm really happy about that. Yes, it's awesome.
But as I understand this somewhat lengthy process, you still have to report to the court. So what I'm wondering is, how do you keep people who are working for you focused on long-term reform when they have been under so much pressure for such a long time?
Well, the whole idea of reform is that it's an iterative process. You don't become reformed on Tuesday and then you're done. You know, you're constantly learning, evolving, you know, looking at the policies, the procedures, the practices of the organization, constantly making sure that they're meeting the modern day standards of policing, and along with that, holding people accountable to adhere to those standards. So I think we're in a great spot right now. We're still looking forward. We've done what we were required to do, but we've gone beyond that, and we're going to continue to do that to make the city safe and to keep it safe. And the officers are really doing a good job. And just recently, we put out our use of force report, and we use force in less than 0.5% of the over 800,000 calls that we respond to every year. We're doing phenomenal work here. So that's how we're going to keep people motivated, by encouraging them to continue on.
How do you both see interactions with diverse communities with police? There's a lot in the news about Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. How do you navigate all of that within the department and externally? Let's start with you.
Well, I think you begin within the department by explaining the history and the background and how movements come to be. And having a Black daughter in my life, she informs me a lot about what her experience are as she, you know, almost 35 years on this planet, what her experience has been as a young Black woman living in Seattle and now in New York City. And so internally we need to focus on the history of our nation, the history of how people have been treated, and so you can start to see people turn to understanding that and realizing that as a woman of white privilege, how different that has been for people of color not having those same privileges. And so it's a long-term education process that we work through every day to get better at.
Great. I actually agree with Mitzi wholeheartedly that these movements start for a reason. So, in case of Blue Lives Matter, we've had, ambushes on officers. I mean, that's no secret. We've seen that happen across the country. We've also seen communities that have been disenfranchised and oppressed and what they're going through. So these movements start for a reason, and it's really incumbent upon us, all of us, to pay attention. Yeah, and to make sure that we're listening to what the problems, the concerns that are coming forward, and trying to make sure that we make a difference in that way.
How do you both feel about the new statewide initiative 940 to the legislature, this initiative to change the standard for police prosecutions? How do you feel about that, Chief Best?
Well, Joni, first and foremost, the sanctity of life is really the most important thing, right? And we'll never vie away from that. And as law enforcement, I think it's really important that whatever the electeds and the community comes up with that they want us to do, we're going to fall in line with it. And that's where we stand on it. We're going to fall in line with it, but we're always going to, first and foremost, take care of the sanctity of life and want to make sure that we're protecting it.
But do you think that the standard, should be changed in light of some things that have happened in this community?
Well, I think because of things that have happened, people are taking a look at it and they want to see some change. And if that comes forward, we're going to march right down the line and do what we're supposed to be doing as a law enforcement agency.
What would you say,
Yeah,
Sheriff?
I concur with what Chief Best is saying, absolutely. As a member of the Washington State Police Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, we are looking at collectively the removing malice from the current law. And so you have people across the board in law enforcement understanding what the community expects of us and where we should go. And again, it is about life. It is about saving life wherever we can. And having the opportunity, I became a cop because I'm a rule follower. Go figure. And so that's what we do, and we adjust to changes in law all the time.
Yeah.
Where do you both stand on safe consumption sites in the city and county?
Well, I think probably everybody knows where I might stand. I'm against them, but I'm against them for a variety of reasons. Most importantly, I've talked to women victims of human trafficking, and their discussion around their fear of being re-victimized if they go to a site to use injectables. And then I've talked to others that say, I get my stuff and I want to use my stuff right now. Traveling without transportation to a site is just not practical for me. So.
Right, and I think everybody's aware that the city is in favor of safe consumption sites and having some in some place here. So my main concern is making sure that we make it actually safe for those who are going to be using there, as well as the area surrounding, and that's a concern for folks. So we're really looking at making sure we can mitigate any problems that might arise from a safe consumption site.
Audience, if you'd like to join us, you know where to walk to ask your question. Steve Militich.
Both of you have been in law enforcement for a long time, and you know that things can be smoothly rolling along, and in an instant, in one call, you can have a crisis. It can be a controversial shooting by an officer. It can be the shooting of an officer. It can be a racially charged incident. When that happens, as chief, you're thrust into very different roles. Can you tell us a little bit about those roles that you suddenly have to deal with and whether you think you're equipped to deal with them?
Well, I can start because I'm competing to get the job permanently, and I certainly think I'm equipped to do the work. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. So, and we know this comes up. I've been, like you said, I've been in this business for almost 3 decades, and these situations will occur with all the training and the policies and everything in place. It doesn't mitigate the fact that at some point there will be something that comes along that's going to be charged for whatever reason. And what people are looking for the chief to do is to be calm, to be thorough, to be fair, to whatever the circumstances are. We want to get to the truth of the matter, whatever that is. And they have to know that we're honest brokers, that we're going to make sure that all the information is given out transparently, thoroughly, and timely so that people can know what happened. And that's what makes people feel, the community feels safe, and the officers are looking for that too. So if it's something that where everybody's justified, they want that information out. If it's something where somebody did something wrong, I always say no one hates bad cops worse than good cops. They want that out too, and they want fair and just, whatever needs the outcome for that. So I feel completely ready for that. I mean, this isn't my first rodeo, so to speak. I've been here a while, and I think I would do just fine.
Yeah. What she said. Sorry, Steve, but to echo that, I've been to many officer-involved shootings. I've done administrative reviews, so I've been through that process, and it is about always remaining fair and calm and putting out information when you know it and you know it's accurate. Because the worst thing that we can do is give bad information out to the media or members of our communities. And so a little bit of what we're doing in the sheriff's office is my chief of staff that I've now hired comes from media. And so
always good to hire the media.
Got to keep you employed, Joni. and so her ability in communications and all community engagement, all of those things are important, and how we tell our story and making sure we get it right every time.
You both also deal with unions. In Seattle's case, there's a very loud, vocal union. They are unhappy because they don't have a contract. The federal judge overseeing the consent decree has accused them of holding reforms hostage to higher pay. In King County, you have a union that's kind of the opposite, very quiet, and that works aggressively behind the scenes. Tell us about your relationship with the unions and how you get them to embrace reform and kind of walk that line.
Steve, I can tell you I've been a member of a union, so I have nothing against unions. They have a role here with the police department. And honestly, I think we have a lot of the same goals in place. I want to see people fairly compensated. I want to see them have a fair and clean work environment and rules that allow them to have transfers and promotions that are fair and just. So we agree on those things. How we get there and the rules around it, sometimes there's differences, but we have to work with them. So I want to make sure we come to the table open-minded and thoughtful about how are we going to get to the end game. And so those conversations can be a little difficult at times, but ultimately, we try to put out what is it we're looking for our officers, because I want to do what's right by them, and they want to do what's right by them. So I think that's our common ground that we can look at and we can start from for a dialogue. Oh, that must be a union person.
Yeah, and for the sheriff's office, our King County Police Officers Guild, which is the deputies and sheriffs deputies and sergeants of the sheriff's office, our largest gun-toting guild, if you will. We're currently in contract negotiations and going in collective bargaining, going to mediation, and one of those things that we're covering is law enforcement oversight. So King County does have an Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. Deborah Jacobs is the director. And so every contract negotiation is growing the connection of independent oversight of the sheriff's office, but it takes contracts and time and communication and changing expectations somewhat, but coming to agreement on all those things we can.
I'm going to take an audience question. Hi.
Hi, my name is Lindsay. I'm a mental health professional at Seattle Children's Hospital, and I have a question about mental health. Over the last year or so, probably last couple of years, we've seen increasing numbers of our families coming into contact with emergency responders in moments of crisis. More and more often, families are feeling like they need to call 911 when kids are actively unsafe. And I was wondering if your departments had initiated any trainings or programs to help with de-escalating those kids in ways that are safe and supportive, as well as programs to help deal with the increasing number of families that are needing those supports in communities.
Well, that is a great question because that intersection of public health and mental health and public safety, it crosses consistently across the city. We're dealing with that. We had approximately 10,000 crisis calls in the Seattle Police Department within a year. And those are bona fide crisis calls. People who we're not guessing that there's something going on. They clearly are in crisis, and our officers are responding. And they're not all juveniles, but just across the board. And so we've done a whole lot in terms of doing crisis intervention training. Everybody in the department has at least 8 hours of it. And then we have folks who have the advanced crisis, over 40% are trained in the advanced crisis intervention, and we want to get more people involved with that. Then we work with our mental health professionals to go out, particularly for those people who have chronic calls that we're trying to address them and work with mental health on that. So using a multidisciplinary approach. But it's a very serious issue. It takes up a lot of time and resources, but the training and how we deal with people in crisis, we've done a much better job. Less than, I don't know the exact number, but it's like less than 1% I know of those calls end up with any use of force used at all. And at one time it was a lot higher than that. So the training is making a difference.
Do you both think there should be a youth jail?
A youth jail, you said?
Yes.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question. And Lindsay, thank you for your question.
Yes, thank you.
It's a great question. So I'm working in the senior leadership team with Executive Constantine on his zero youth detention work. And it's bringing a public health lens to how we do youth detention. And I think it's critical to finding different ways to do restorative justice, to use diversion and other many multitudes of options. I've heard said this example while I've been involved in the leadership team, which is in public health, we do a lot of things to inoculate ourselves from catching disease. And what we don't do enough of, and why we're looking at it this way, is with youth, how we can help inoculate our youth. But then when they do catch the flu or something, that we're there to help holistically work with them. And so if you put that into the concept of juvenile justice, you can see kind of how you can work that differently. And so public health is working with us. The courts have been amazing, and they've already done, Presiding Judge Inveen has already done, over the course of years, work in this area.
Presiding Judge Inveen is here.
Oh, is she?
I could have sworn I saw her.
Oh, yeah.
Shout out, Judge.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And so anyway, it's really exciting, the opportunity to have law enforcement involved in that as a solution.
Yes.
Anytime we don't have to take someone to jail, it makes all of us better.
Just real quickly,
I would just agree. I want to call you with the sheriff, since I was calling you Mitzi and you're calling me Chief Best. so I would agree. I mean, as much as we can use diversion and other means than to put young people in jail. We all know that research has shown that their minds aren't fully developed until in their 20s, and so we have to take that into consideration when we're looking at how we're going to address young people. Look at diversionary solutions and reaching out to other entities and treating it as a public health issue when we can.
Enrique.
So you both have daughters that are African American. I'm curious when you had the talk with your daughters, and I'm also curious when they had the talk with you.
Boy, what is the talk?
I got this one.
Well, that could go a lot of different ways.
V-talk. V-talk of when they start driving. So they talk about how, being a person of color, you deal with cops pulling you over who are predominantly white Caucasian folks, right? Mm-hmm. And so, we had the talk. And then the shift happened, Enrique, where as I'm in law enforcement for a while and Sydney starts to grow and become a person of her own, the talk came back, which was That's why I talked about before, being informed by my daughter's life experiences, something I could never understand. And so until I had her help me with that. And so that's the talk back. Yeah.
Right, so yeah, we talk about, really what we talked about with my daughters is being respectful, not just about, traffic stops, but generally speaking, being respectful. Generally speaking, understanding, race and race issues. We have very frank conversations about it. My daughters are biracial, so, they grew up in a family with, white people and black people. They also grew up around a lot of cops. So they understand that officers are people, so the officers that they know have kids, have picnics, have parties, so they understand that the perception isn't necessarily the reality. So they have a different perspective just because of where they grew up. So they're able to sort of navigate both of those areas pretty well. They're not naive to what's happening around them, but they're pretty resilient and they understand, they have to maneuver through those channels.
Audience, hi.
2 quick questions. You both have been in law enforcement for a long time. What drew you to that profession? And then 2, what is it like to be a leader among the majority males?
Right. Well, it's like child rearing in some ways.
Nicely done.
No, seriously though,
You were serious.
Yeah. So what drew me to the profession? I was in the military for a long time, for a few years anyway. I got out, and I really didn't know. There you are. I really didn't know if I was going to stay in the profession, if it was going to be for me. I kind of just said, I'm single, I'll go in and we'll see how it works. And I really did fall in love with the job. When I said it's a labor of love, it really is a labor of love. I went in with no expectations, and I was in a academy class because like 90% of the people in that class were saying, I wanted to be a cop since I was 2 or 3, and that's just the nature of what it is. I wasn't one of those people, but really, I've enjoyed every moment of it, and a lot of what we do is about service. It really is. I mean, what you see on TV, we say it all the time, but it's car chases and gunfights and people rappelling off buildings and all that stuff. And that's really not what we do on a daily basis. It doesn't happen very often. I mean, it really is meeting people who are vulnerable, who are in crisis, who have really serious issues at that moment in time, and being able to relate to them on an interpersonal level and help them through whatever it is. Sometimes it's not just the victims, it's the suspects who are suffering too. So, that's what drew me there, and that's what's kept me all these years.
Sure.
Some of us have gone out of the sides of helicopters and stuff like that, but you have? Just saying. It was a lot of fun. And so anyway, to get to your question, I wanted to say I started as a 5-year-old in the department so that it wouldn't make me that.
Like you're 37?
I remember growing up as a kid and, picture this. I'm about 4.5 years old. For Christmas, I got a pedal tractor. And then my brother was out in the backyard building a fort, and I was riding my pedal tractor, and my mom wanted to make sure I was warm because it was the middle of winter, and we used to have winters. And so I had a scarf tied under my chin and a plastic army helmet on. A couple things became really clear at that point. But law enforcement was something I did want to do, and so thank you for asking.
Nice little segue there.
So we're going to run out of time here before I know it. I want to ask about a story that was in the Seattle Times, and it was about how the 911 centers are overwhelmed with mental health, as one questioner pointed out, but also with the incidents of people in distress from homelessness.
Yep.
What is a reasonable way to make it so that the 911 centers can handle all of those calls?
Well, we're working on that now. I mean,
together, are you working? Are you working on this together?
When I say we, I mean the department's working with the
okay.
911 centers to make sure that we have, and with the fire department, because we all first responders are dealing with this issue.
We're happy to take some of those calls for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's been, thanks, Mitzi. It's been, the issue of homelessness in and of itself has been huge for the whole city, and certainly for the police department as one aspect of dealing with it. We sat at a conference for the Police Executive Research Forum about 2 weeks ago now, and it was 250 law enforcement from across the country, and we spent 9 hours, we didn't even leave, we had lunch right there, talking about the issues around homelessness, opioid addiction, people in crisis, all of the things that come into play. And there's, in some cases, people who are exploiting those folks, who are running guns through there and trafficking. I mean, there are a whole host of services that need to work on this issue, not just for the responding to 911 calls, but other aspects of it as well.
I don't know how much time you have, because you want to probably get to a questioner. But yeah, so as a precinct commander, right before I took office, I would sit and listen to at least 8 calls for people in crisis, either behavioral health or other things, each shift. So, and that's just, the county has a lower call volume than the city of Seattle does, just based on population. And that's a lot of response. And so, while it didn't impact our communications center that much, it does tie up police resources that could be used elsewhere. And so we're starting to work and with our strategic plan to figure out how we can balance that, but also bring in the professionals with us in response, so that we can mitigate and slow down those calls.
And I have to jump in because we have a navigation team that we put together. So it's a lieutenant, a sergeant, and 8 officers that work in a multidisciplinary approach. So they work with public health and with social services to actually go out and contact people and try to get them into services at these homeless encampments.
Chief Best, you are the interim Chief Best at the moment.
Yes.
Why should the search committee pick you? You expressed earlier your enthusiasm for this job, but why you?
Well, thanks, Joni. No, I mean, I feel like I am absolutely ready and prepared for this, right? I've worked in this agency for 26 years. I'm 52, so it's half of my life that I've been working with the Seattle Police Department. So in a few years, I'm going to be done, with this. But I actually think what a great honor if I could lead this organization, the people that I love in the organization, in the city that I love, at the end of my career, and making a real difference. I feel like our job is so important and so valuable. I feel honor in the profession and what we do every day. And when I say it's a service, it really is a service. And I feel more than prepared to do the work. I've worked in almost every area of the organization. I have, done my law enforcement training. I'm on the Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force, which is a whole host of law enforcement professionals who are working on immigration issues, because we don't feel like local law enforcement, that's not our role and our function to work on immigration. When we have no crime in the city, then we can do something else. But right now, we have other things to focus on. I also am on the Human and Civil Rights Committee for the International Association of Police Chiefs. I've gone to Police Executive Leadership Institute training. I've been to the FBI National Academy, the Senior Management Institute for Police. I'm finishing up my master's.
You know what? We have to leave it there.
I'm ready.
I could talk to you both all night. We have been talking with King County Sheriff Mitzi Johanknecht and Interim Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best. We're coming back next month with gardening guru Cisco Morris. Spring will be here before you know it. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.